All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Just as a reminder to everyone, this meeting is being recorded, so we will be able to review it and reference back to it off of the GYA.org/handicap website. But at the end, if we get to questions, let's everybody be a little respectful. And I also, let's not dive too deep into specific boat handicap details. We're going to be doing a series of these webinars, and we can kind of attack those as we get to them. For everybody who doesn't know me, my name is Kevin Blank. I am the current GYA Handicap Chairman. I am taking over or have taken over the position from Tom Berry, who has been in that position since, I believe, the early 80s, 82, 81, something like that. He is still on the committee right now, basically doing backup to me, helping me with just the last of issuing the PHRF certificates that we're still maintaining till the end of the year, and also maintaining the ORA-1 certificates and ratings till the end of the year. Also on the committee and joining us tonight is Ket Cummins. He is both on the GYA Handicap Committee and also on the board of ORR. So he's a great resource especially from a technical aspect, but also just to understand more about the rating systems in general and everything. So welcome everybody that's here. I see we got a good handful of people here on the call, and welcome to everybody who is going to be watching later on with the recording. So we'll go ahead and jump in. So tonight's webinar is really just an introduction to ORR-Ez, what it is and why we're moving to it, and just some more details about the certificates themselves and how the ratings work. So at the core of ORR-Ez is what everybody will call, and you'll hear a lot of three-letter terms as we go through this, and I'll try to keep those pretty straightforward. And the first term that we're going to talk about is VPP, and what is a VPP-based rating system. A VPP stands for Velocity Prediction Program. And that simply is an algorithm that looks at a file that we call an offset file. And it uses a number of different algorithms and formulas, X, Y, and Z. It's all proprietary. And they use that information to predict the sailboat's speed and performance under varying wind and sea conditions. And you'll frequently see this. It's been being used for many years. Most nautical engineers will use a very similar type program to just predict what the models that they design will perform in real life situations. That same information is what's used historically to make polar plots for predicted boat speeds and things like that. So they're not a new thing. They've been around for many, many years. And in these systems, they take into account the boat's design characteristics, the hull shapes, the underwater appendages, the shapes of the keel and the rudder, and they look at the sail area and the displacement, the rigging, and use that information to basically come up with a yardstick to compare everybody against. One of the nice things that we really like about VPPs in general is they're much less subjective and much more objective. It's the same formula and the same set of criteria being used to rate all the boats. And so not one boat is getting treated differently because of quote unquote lawyers in the room or something like that. So now the question is why is the GYA decided to move to a VPP-based rating system? And there's really a lot of reasons. One of the biggest reasons, and Tom Berry will tell you this, is that he was having a very hard time, almost an impossible time, trying to find somebody to take over the job. The current PERF system would take, as the last iteration of the PERF committee was operating, there was 5 area handicappers supported by a number of assistant handicappers that would meet 3 times a year to review all the race data. As the times have changed, and we've had the introduction to sprit boats and sport boats, also just the fact that we've got a lot of boats that are asking for ratings that may not actually do a lot of local races, that system has been kind of falling apart. Or at least it just hasn't been being updated. And that's kind of the second point, is that performance handicap requires performance data, and we have not been getting a lot of, or any really data input from any of the clubs over the last couple of years. But especially, like I said, there are boats that have been looking for ratings and haven't actually performed. So everything becomes a guess at that point. And especially as new boats come off the line and they don't race, they just want to do 1 or 2 races like Gulfport, Pensacola. It's really just a guessing game. So just from an operational standpoint, there's just been some hardships with continuing the PHRF system. Another drawback of the PHRF system is that it's a single number system, meaning that we use the same rating for both spinnaker and non-spinnaker classes, assuming that if all the boats that sail spinnaker choose to sail non-spinnaker, it's going to be the same differences in boats between the two, and that's not usually the case. It's a false assumption, and we know that certain boats just perform dramatically differently under spinnaker versus non-spinnaker, and that may be different from a J boat or something else. And there's no way of accounting for that. So frankly, a lot of cruisers and or less experienced sailors that don't want to sail with a spinnaker have always been a little bit, at a disadvantage. And we've had to always split fleets and things like that. I've already mentioned another note I have on here. We've had a number of rating requests, especially for either Gulfport, Pensacola or the Mexico race. Boats that are either brand new or boats that are just new to the area and may have never had a certificate before in any region in the United States, which makes giving them a PHRF certificate very difficult to give it accurate, and that's what we're always striving for is accurate and level playing field. So another kind of and this is something that actually a number of PHRF regions are looking at across the country, like San Diego being one of them, also up in the Chesapeake and a few other places, is that a single number rating system is just not able to represent the courses and the weather conditions that we see on a day-to-day basis. It may average out over the year, but if you have sailors that only sail 1 or 2 races a year, there's nothing to average out. And so they may have a good or a bad experience with that. And so a wind-sensitive type rating system like ORR-Ez provides the opportunity to give a more fair rating in a variety of wind conditions and course configurations. And then also one of the bigger things that Ket's brought up before and that we've talked about, and I always talk about extensively, is back when PHRF was originally designed, most of the boats were coming off of very similar performance models, the IOR style, and those boats in the early 80s and late 70s. Very little difference in the boat performance over wind ranges, and a lot of it had to do with just waterline length. And that made having a single number system a lot easier because the boats relative in performance as the wind changed or the course changed were not dramatically different. But with the popularity of sprit boats and asymmetrical designs, all that's gone out the window. Planing hulls or boats that plane in certain conditions, it's just not the same landscape as it was 30 and 40 years ago. And so the single number system really kind of falls apart. And so in all of this, looking at all of both the logistical side of just maintaining a PHRF committee and then just the problems with a single number system, instead of investing more time and more volunteer energy on trying to expand the single number to multiple ratings, it was decided that let's just use an existing system that's been vetted over the last, I think, 10 or 20 years, that's also supported by US Sailing, and use that as our model to move forward. So hopefully that gave everybody a lot of information about the decision-making process. It was not taken lightly, and we want to continue to serve the GYA, and we feel like this is the best way to be as fair as possible moving forward. So one of the things I mentioned is wind speed and course sensitivity, and it's a term that gets thrown around a little bit when we talk about these ratings, kind of on the inside. It's a little inside baseball, but it's just the term that we use, meaning that the rating system has the capability to change based on whether, if it's blowing 4 knots or if it's blowing 14 knots. And it also has the ability to change if you're sailing just standard windward leewards, or you're sailing off the wind for the entire race, or you're sailing in a large triangle. the default that's on the ORR certificates that you'll see like under like standard ratings and stuff, you'll see that the wind speeds, at least in the 2024 certificates, are broken down into 5 wind bands: a light, a medium light, a very light, a light, a medium light, and a medium, and a heavy. And that gives you the ability to kind of break the conditions up so that boats that, like a large fat displacement boat, is going to have a much more forgiving rating in the light and medium light ratings, wind bands, but probably won't get as much advantage in the heavy. Whereas a boat that's a lightweight boat is not going to get nearly as much advantage in the light wind. And so things will start to kind of even out. This goes even farther when we talk about something like what the system that we use at like Challenge Cup, which is PCS, which is called polar curve or performance curve scoring. It's kind of goes by both names depending on what rating system you're looking at. And that, in effect, basically smooths out and actually eliminates all the wind bands so that we actually look at the performance of each individual boat over the course and determine who sailed best to their rating for that particular course configuration, and then use that to actually rank the boats for their finish order. So a little bit more about what ORR is. So ORR, or ORA, actually, the group that actually started everything was actually, I guess it was actually 20 years ago, was established in 2004 as a nonprofit organization with a mission to promote the sports enjoyment of boat owners and sailors by improving the current rating rules, both in the content of the rating and in the administrative process it takes to do everything. Most of the ORR ratings were being used at that originally, I think were being, and correct me if I'm wrong, but originally were being used for a lot of the offshore events. They were used for like Newport, Bermuda. Originally, they were being used in the Mackinac race, although I think that's changed now to ORC. I believe there's a 1 or 2 Pacific long distance races that use ORR. And really those ORR ratings are kind of the creme de la creme of the rating system. They're the full ORR rating is a fully measured rating. That rating has I forget how many points, but it's a couple hundred points of rating measurements that are made. And it requires an official measurer. And there's a cost and a time that's involved with that. And those are used for those high performance, high dollar offshore racing events. Not super long ago, I forget exactly how many years ago, but the ORA group introduced what's called ORR-Ez, which is developed as a simpler version of these ratings with a focus on club level events, not requiring nearly as many measurements, not requiring an actual certified measurer to come measure the boats. So it brings the cost dramatically down to something that's more appropriate at the club level. The EZ certificates provide a number of different ways of looking at the rating data, and it allows everyone as an organization to choose basically how detailed they want to handle the ratings and the courses and things like that. The scale of basically what we can do is you actually use EZ ratings with a single number time on distance formula, just like we use traditionally with PHRF. And you can go all the way to actually like building out constructed courses where we actually like define like different points of sail and how much time was spent on those points of sail. And then again, use that polar curve scoring to actually like even everything out and really give a highly accurate, detailed look at the performance of each boat over the race course. And there's a variety that we can choose from, and we'll actually go more into the detail on where it's appropriate to use what style of rating off the certificates when we go into the race committee webinar that'll actually happen in about 4 weeks from now. And I invite everybody here to join us for that. Even if you're not necessarily a race officer, it's still a great way to understand like how the decisions are being made on the race course and how we're suggesting that the decisions be made. Because we're trying to make that as easy as possible. So the next thing I want to talk about is basically kind of where can you see these certificates? So because the GYA is no longer the rating authority, it is now ORA. These certificates are actually available on their website, and they have partnered. I'm going to share my screen here for a second so you can see it. Regatta Management is actually the group that is now I'm sorry. Regatta Management is the company that ORA employs to basically publish and maintain the online version of all their certificates. So the easiest thing to do, you just go to their website is regattaman.com. You'll come up here to the top of the screen, you'll click on certificates, and then the fastest thing to do is to click on Easy Valid List, and that'll show you. And then I also clear all the filters and look at all the to get all of the ratings. So usually I have to click all to get the effective date on there. And that'll give you all the ratings for all the boats in the country that are currently rated. Currently on the Gulf Coast, we have a little over 120 boats that are rated currently. So that's actually that's a pretty good handful. We actually represent a relatively large proportion of the current certificates in EZ. So that gives us a little bit of pull to basically make suggestions and things as things go on. So we go back to looking at a specific certificate itself. We're just going to kind of talk through a little bit of here, and I want to make sure that nobody gets scared of all the numbers. One of the things I've heard a lot from people that I've talked to, or that have talked to me about moving to ORR-Ez is that they find that the certificates are just a lot more complicated to look at. There's a lot more detail to be concerned about, and it can be a little overwhelming to look at. A little bit overwhelming as far as the number of numbers to look at. So every year, I think, or almost every year, ORA works with Regatta Man to kind of hopefully improve this certificate so that we can basically make things a little bit easier to understand. The first page of the certificate is really kind of the details that you really need to focus on. You'll notice that most of the details on the left side and down at the bottom, these are almost all the exact same details that you would see on a standard PHRS certificate. There is a little bit more depending on what you submit for your sails. There's a little bit more detail with mainsail and jib measurements for your largest head sail. That's just to give that basically those couple more numbers for the measurements give the formulas a little bit more detail on the boat and a little bit better representation of the performance. So, but for the most part, it's basically the same details that you've always had to provide for PHRF certificates in the past. The numbers to really pay attention to when you're comparing yourself to another boat are these numbers at the top. So we have, in this case, we're looking at a Victus, a J105 in a one design configuration, and you'll notice that up here with OD at the top. So that represents that if you ever see OD in the certificate, that means that the offset file that's being used and the sail plan being used is of the one design configuration for that particular boat, as opposed to a standard just regular boat that will not have the one design in there. So Ket can give you more details on what boats actually count for one design or not, but it tends to be a lot of the J boats and Melges 24s, Melges 32s, things like that. The numbers to really pay attention to on the boat are right here highlighted at the top. And by default, when you submit your application for certificate, you're going to get both a Spinnaker and non-Spinnaker rating, which is actually an advantage over something like ORC, where you actually have to pay for a separate certificate for non-Spinnaker. You actually get both of those in one, so it's actually even more of a discount than the already discounted price versus ORC. But that being said, if you are a boat, and if this really goes out to the cruisers out there or the cruiser racers that either don't have the crew or don't want to have the extra expense of the Spinnaker, you can submit your application with non-Spinnaker only, and you will only see the non-Spinnaker line on the certificate. But because now that we can compare apples to apples instead of apples to oranges when it comes to Spinnaker and non-Spinnaker, we can start to sail in mixed fleets, just like on Wednesday nights and things like that. Again, that's something we'll go over in the race management, but we've had good success with that over here at Fort Walton, mixing both Spinnaker and non-Spinnaker in the same class. as opposed to keeping them completely separated like what we've done in the past with PHRF. The three numbers that are highlighted here are GPH, which is a general purpose handicap, is what that stands for. Again, I told you there's going to be a lot of three-letter numbers in here, or three-letter terms, so don't let it get too crazy. And always there's a glossary here on the back that points out what most of the details mean. So feel free to reference that if you don't quite know what one of the codes means on your certificate. But GPH as a general purpose handicap is just something that there's a little detail on how they actually figured it out, but it basically gives both another three-letter term, TCF, or time correction factor, which is for time on time scoring, and then a seconds per mile rating next to it for that particular boat. The one that we tend to use more often when we're looking at boats are the IR number and the PHRF benchmark. Now, if you look at IR number, IR is going to tell you, wherever they put it down here, that's more of an international rating number. I think that's what that stands for. I always just call it the IR number, but the IR number is designed to represent the average course and wind speed that is typically used in PHRF regions for their measurement, for their performance data. So Keck, again, can talk to the specific details, but I believe it's a large majority of windward leeward work with a little bit of reaching involved. It's really a formula, like I said, designed to match closely to what PHRF regions have done traditionally. Again, this gives you a TCF, or a time on time number here, and that's basically that's set as a decimal percentage. So I can explain more on how that. I'll talk a little bit more about what these numbers really, how they actually work in a little bit later on. And then it also gives you a time on distance number. Now, out of the box, EZ gives you time on distance numbers, which time on distance numbers are the same type of numbers that we have for PHRF, the number of seconds per mile that your boat is predicted to perform under a 1 mile course for any particular point of sail. But out of the box, the EZ numbers are a pure number of seconds per mile. So what that would mean is, at the end of the day, when you do an adjustment or when you do your correction for everybody's rating, it's actually going to end up being closer. Your elapsed time will actually be closer to 0, because this is estimating your actual time you should be on the course. What every PHRF region in the world has always done is they've always aligned these numbers to a scratch boat in their fleet, so that the numbers make a little bit more sense. And that's what we've always done in PHRF. We've always traditionally aligned our PHRF numbers to the J105. Previously, I believe, I forget when this changed, but a while back, it was actually the J35 used to be the scratch boat at 72, which is why the 72, and that was common with a lot of PHRF regions, and that's why the 72 for PHRF for the J35 didn't change pretty much anywhere, because it was used as the benchmark boat. As of more recently, Tom started using the 105 as the benchmark boat, because it was just more representative of the current fleet at the time. And this particular number now, ORR-Ez, because they're a little bit more, well, because they have to be a national thing, they chose actually to reference these off of the FAR 40s. So basically, they take the FAR 40s IR number and look at the difference, and that's how they arrive at this benchmark number. So these two numbers are interrelated, with the difference being the FAR 40 being the benchmark boat. Again, these PHRF numbers are pretty close to what you might see in a region, but they will be a little bit different. So you can only really use these to compare boats one to one another. So give me 1 second. I'm just looking at my notes here. So one thing you're going to notice with the ratings is that we've got a couple different tabs up here, basically kind of giving us a different look at the rating data. So the first tab that you see here is called the polar data. And this is actually giving you seconds per mile for both your actual best VMG upwind, and then every angle of sail in between, and then your best VMG running downwind. Which is why these numbers differ a little bit more, because if you look at the beat VMG, this number is actually accounting for, I forget the exact decimal percentage, but 0.7 is usually what I use for my offhand calculation. But that's actually accounting for tacking upwind. So you're sailing along your distance. But if the course was actually only 52 degrees true, you're sailing a much shorter distance, which is why this number changes dramatically here. A nice piece of information they also tell you is what your optimal beat angle is. So this angle of tacking basically comes out of the system based off of the hull appendages and the hull shape and the sail plan, and tells you what you should probably be tacking in. So I don't have the formula right in front of me, but there's actually a simple formula you can use to actually turn all of these numbers into target boat speeds. So with a table of target boat speeds and your optimum angle for both beating and for running, you can set yourself up a nice little laminated card that you can keep in the cockpit or keep in your pocket or something like that, and actually kind of like look at your performance on the water and kind of use that as a guide or a yardstick to compare yourself against. You can see that both were represented both in spinnaker and non-spinnaker here. So you get that. And then below at the bottom, this PCS ratings, this is where the courses come in. And we'll talk more about PCS again when we get to the race management side, but the PCS numbers basically these are preset courses that determine, obviously windward leeward 50-50 is 50% upwind VMG and 50% downwind VMG. And then it gets a little more complicated for some of the other course types. And those course types are going to hold true as we look at the standard ratings. Now, I don't have great detail on this, but my understanding is because the ORR ratings were originally used for mostly like premier offshore racing, and offshore racing tends to use time on time as their rating system of choice. That's why ORR and ORR-Ez use as their quote unquote standard ratings time on time numbers. And these are time correction factors. The easiest way to think about time correction factors these are just a multiplier against your lapse time. And that's how you calculate your corrected time at the end. So in the case of light air here in 5 to 7 on random leg, it's almost 50. So that would be basically 56%. You would multiply, and it ends up being, it's basically multiplying your elapsed time by about 156. And that would be your corrected time. And that's a way to think about that. And you can see that as the wind speeds actually go up and the boat performance goes up, the elapsed time, you would actually be multiplying it out, and your elapsed time would actually be longer when you get to the heavy air stuff. And the biggest thing to take apart or take away, I guess, when you look at these numbers, because we're not usually, this is something I find really new for most people down here. We're so used to a time on distance number. We're so used to looking at seconds per mile. And we're so used to understanding that the lower seconds per mile, the faster the boat is. When you look at time correction factors and when you look at time on time ratings, you have to just think the opposite. The lower the number, the slower the boat is performing, and the higher the number, the faster the boat is performing. So that's just something you got to remember, that low numbers are fast in time on distance and in PHRF, and in time on time numbers or TCF numbers, high numbers are fast and small numbers are low. So again, you'll see that. And you don't really need to worry about all this. And that's probably the biggest thing also that I want to stress is most of this data is not really designed for you to really it's not designed for you to memorize. You don't have to have this like off your cuff and be able to repeat this at a moment's notice. Most of this information is designed to be used by the scorers and by the race committees. And for a piece of software like my software, Next Sailor, as well as Regatta Man and some others out there, these ratings and all this data gets imported automatically. So all the race committee does is choose the wind range and what course type was used, and all of these ratings automatically come in. So it's not stuff that you have to worry about on a day-to-day basis. One of the nice things that they've also introduced, I believe this is in 2024, they introduced this new page to the certificate and basically gives us the exact same 5 wind bands and also the same 6 courses, but breaks it down into the PHRF benchmark numbers. So if you're sailing a shorter course, you're sailing Wednesday nights, and your race committee wants to use more friendly time on distance, because we can make those calculations in our head based on seconds per mile, they have all that data is available as well. So again, you've got your benchmark at the top, and then if you want to use single win numbers versus the 5 wins, they also produce something there, which I believe is probably an average of somewhere close to like the 10 to 12 knot range, which is traditionally what's used in a lot of perf regions around the country for these particular courses and stuff. So one of the things that I'm sure everybody's thinking right now, as we're looking at the large variety of numbers that we see on these certificates, is basically how do these new ratings compare to the legacy PHRF numbers? It's going to be, and frankly, the first thing that comes out of my mouth or out of Tom's mouth or Ket's mouth is it's really hard to actually compare these numbers because, like I said earlier, these quote unquote PHRF numbers, which are really just time on distance numbers, they're aligned to the FAR 40. And historically, our GYA PHRF numbers have been aligned to both either the J35 way back and then more recently the J105. So the numbers just aren't always going to translate back and forth. The best thing I can say, though, is the ORA1 numbers that we've been using or have been available for clubs to use in the past 3 years. Those ORA1 numbers are derived from all this same data here. It's a much simplified version with just 2 race courses and 2 wind ranges. But as we look at those ORA1 numbers, and as users of Next Sailor and myself have done scoring with ORA1, we haven't really found any dramatic differences basically in the results. Like there might be some small differences that you'll see, like maybe that boat's a little closer or a little farther away in the corrected times and stuff. But for the most part, the fast boats keep winning and the slow boats keep losing, and it doesn't dramatically change the difference. So I invite everybody to kind of review the ORA1 numbers. They're going to stay on the webpage for at least probably throughout next year as well, just as kind of a reference. But those of the clubs that have been using the ORA1 numbers, very few have seen dramatic differences in their fleet shakeup and stuff like that. So really what that comes down to is it's kudos to the PHRF committee as they operated for the last 40 years, because that means that they were doing their job well, and the computer for the most part is agreeing with exactly what the PHRF committee was agreeing with. The differences I think that you'll see really come into the fact that because PHRF was a single number system, it couldn't describe a lightweight boat getting a benefit in light air because it had less mass to move through the water. Whereas an old Beneteau just is not going to accelerate as fast in the light air. And so those ratings, those average, the rating was always an average. And so those things weren't being accounted for. And now they are accounted for. And I think that's probably the biggest difference that people notice, is that you're going to see that sometimes your boat's going to be rated dramatically faster or dramatically slower than another competitor. And sometimes it'll be a lot closer depending on the race course and depending on the wind speed for that particular event. That's about my presentation for tonight. I mean, as far as what I have for prepared notes, I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen right now. And I am going to allow people to unmute themselves if they wish. But first, I'll ask Ket, again, Ket being one of our GYA Handicap Committee members, as well as our direct liaison to ORA. Do you have anything to add tonight as far as our introduction to EZ and how the certificates work and things like that? We should probably talk a little bit about the application process if you don't have any other notes, if we want to talk about that a little bit.
No, you did a good job. You pretty much covered everything. Good overview. Yeah, it wouldn't hurt to look at the application process, at least how to get to it. If you want to share, can you share that Forgot a Man page again?
Yeah, let me just jump back here.
Let me start. Okay, that's it. Yeah, certificates. Let me start by pointing out, go down to the bottom. You see the current One Design template list, click on that. That shows you all the boats that have One Design certificates. And the One Design certificate is really just a shortcut. It's less expensive than a standard certificate, but when you get a One Design certificate, you're tied into the class rules on the sale size, and so forth. It's sort of like an off the shelf item as opposed to a custom uh, rating for your boat that might or might not, it might be more favorable to do a custom rating. Whereas if you use a One Design rating, you're tied to the class rules uh, for the sail size, crew weight, and boat displacement. Um, but that's just, I just wanted to show that list there. Okay, then you can go to the from this page, you can click apply and renew, and that brings you log in with just your email, right?
Oh,
Oh,
it doesn't like my plus. All right. I don't think I have it. I don't think I have a certificate in there yet.
okay, well, you don't need to do.
Okay.
Well,
Well, I can if you want, but
that's fine. Go ahead.
really? Oh, I did Kevin at. All right, hold on. Let me clean that up. Oh, there we
There.
go. Okay.
Um, and here you just start filling out, your general information. Most of this needs to identify the correct model of boat. The year built is important, so we get the right, generation of boat and such. And then after this, you'd have the opportunity to enter all the specific data that's shown on the first page of the certificate.
What
Although, go ahead.
I was going to say, what does the it's the largest differences between a PHRF certificate and the ORR-Ez as far as sail measurement goes? It's the mainsail and head and largest head sail, correct? What are those
Yeah,
measurements that they need to
the
take?
mainsail dimensions, the largest headsail, and the largest spinnaker is what you submit. Um, and that can vary. Typically PHRF, you would adjust it 6 seconds or 9 seconds if you went with from a 155 to a working jib or something like that. And ORR-Ez will obviously break that down to a much more specific rating depending on the size of the sail.
Okay. And
Um,
then and then what happens? So I know we have, I think, at least 90 boats with current PHRF certificates right now that don't match current boats in your guys' system. So what happens if I have either a boat that doesn't live in the system or a boat that may be a one-off or a modified design from the original manufacturer? What happens in that case?
right. Well, in order to run the VPP, you have to have an offsets file, which is a digital virtual model of the hull of the boat. And then the VPP sinks that hull in the water and applies the sail plan to it and uh, develops ratings for different points of sail and different wind strengths. But that model of the hull is critical to running the VPP. So for say a one-off boat, we have to generate that offsets file. Most production boats we already have an offsets file for, like all the J boats, whatever. Any typical production boat you can think of already has an offsets file, or there's one on file somewhere. Um, so we can, if we need an offsets file, then we have to create one for that boat if the boat doesn't have one already. And but that's something that the ORR-Ez can do,
Okay.
create that file. So that's not something we expect to be provided by the owner.
Okay. But there may be some information, photos or things like that, that may be required that really get into a specific case by case basis on for those boats that are really like the Olson 34 that's here at our club that require
Sure,
we needed to see the keel and things like that.
yes, we can work with the owners and to establish what we need for the VPP
Okay.
offsets file.
So we've got the sail measurements. Can those be the sail measurements? Can those be are those required to be done by a sailmaker or an approved rater, or can you just take those yourself?
It's best to be done by a sailmaker or somebody that knows how to do it. It's not difficult, but there are some quirks to it that you need to use the right process. There are actually some good videos on the ORC website that show you how to measure a sail. That I've already discovered one error in there, but again, generally it's not a difficult process, but it's certainly easier for somebody that has done it before and knows what they're doing.
Or even has the loft and the space to be able to do it on some of the
That's
big
another
boats.
issue. You have to have a
Yeah.
place to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I will note that just as a more personal note for everybody. So I'm a member of both Tammany Yacht Club and Fort Walton Yacht Club. And at the beginning of the year, Fort Walton decided to adopt ORR-Ez as our official ratings for all of our Wednesday nights. So it required a bunch of boats to get out and get their and get all their sales measured. And Hunter over at Sure Sales was great and measured a bunch of people's sales for them so they get on the straight and narrow for getting their certificate done. And I will say that almost everybody was a little surprised at the actual size of their sales, because what we typically might know or have purchased as a 155 quote unquote, or a 135 or a 95 or whatever size head sail, especially over the years, or even from the original manufacturer, those sails may not be the actual size that you think they are. Depending on the sailcloth, they may have shrunk. They may be actually a little bit oversized. I've seen some head sails at 157 or 158%. I've seen some at 100 and it's supposed to be 135, and I've seen it down at like 132. So it definitely helps to get the most accurate rating if you go and get them measured. And it usually is pretty inexpensive and it doesn't take a lot of time if you feel like it's a little bit too tall of a task for yourself. So I definitely encourage that. And I know David Boyard over at Ullman/Westwind has no problem doing it. Hunter over here at Sure, and I'm sure you get the North Sales Loft and Quantum and things like that. They're all usually willing and very eager to help people out with moving getting these sail measurements done. So, Scott, you might want to put it back in the chat. You had a question about first you say SOP, then DPP, and I'm just wondering if you meant VPP. And if you missed it from the beginning of the call, the VPP is the velocity prediction program, and that's the set of algorithms. Basically, it's kind of like a virtual test tank for these boat models to sail in, and they use that to basically determine both the riding movement and the boat speed throughout water in this kind of quote unquote virtual setting and things like that. I don't think it has any cool 3D graphics involved, but it is basically treating it the same way that any physics-based model would be working. So they, like I said, the VPPs are very commonly used and used by every nautical engineering company to determine whether they're making 16-foot boats or 160-foot boats, to determine sea state characteristics and target boat speeds and all that kind of stuff. So if anybody has any other questions for myself or for Ket as far as this kind of introduction to Easy goes, feel free to either raise your hand or feel free to unmute yourself. I think I gave everybody the option to unmute themselves, and I'm happy to kind of field any kind of general questions right now for the next maybe 15 minutes or so.
Hey, Kevin, it's Ramstein from BBSC.
Hey, Ramstein.
Thanks for having this. First of all, it's been awesome. We have a bunch of folks, and we understand the shrinking sales effect, but if we have a bunch of folks that either don't want to prioritize the time or don't have the time to go bring their stuff over to Hunter, but Hunter made their sales, can we go off of whatever he has for those sale measurements?
Yeah, if
That's
you've
a
got,
great idea. Yeah.
yeah, if you've got the sale measurements from when you place the order, then you can definitely use those as a starting point and things like that. So,
And then the final question I have is, I can't remember the gentleman's name already because I missed him on there. But he said, you asked him, do you have to get your sales measured by a real person who knows all the stuff? And his answer was, it's best to do that. But that kind of leaves it open that no, we can go to the website, watch the video, bring them out to the high and dry, and measure a bunch of people's sales in one weekend.
right. This is, the easy and forgive me, Ken, if I speak out of turn here, but basically the easy is a club-based rating, and in a very almost exact same vein as PHRF, it's an honor-based system that the sale measurement that you're giving is the sale measurement that you're actually sailing with. And so, if you feel that, with a little bit of YouTube, university type work, that you can get out there and you feel like you're giving accurate measurements and you feel confident about that. I mean, it's the same as if you were to submit it to the PHRF committee and you said your head sales at 155%. Like, it's no different really in that respect. So, like I said, for me personally, my yards for any larger boat than basically a Viper 640, my yard isn't big enough to actually measure a sail in. So I would probably want to go to a loft or something just for the space. But, some people might have a large ballroom at their yacht club, and you can get, if you just get, watch the stuff, get accurate, get your big long measuring tape out, you might be able to do it yourselves. It's not necessarily something you have to spend money on.
Yeah, I was just looking at for avenues of figuring out how to get more people to be interested in doing it.
Yep.
So thank you for that.
Yeah. Gigi, if I'm saying that right, asks a question that she looked at her perf rating and noticed some of the information was incorrect or updated. It's definitely important that you review the information on your certificate. A lot of people, and we've run into this a couple times already with moving to EZ, that people just move the numbers over from their perf certificate because most of the numbers from perf to EZ are going to be the same numbers, the J dimensions and all that kind of stuff. Definitely double check those numbers that you're putting in. There could have been either from the original certificate application with PHRF, or the fact that maybe you bought a longer spinnaker pole and maybe you forgot to report it because you only do club races and that was 10 years ago or something. Definitely double check the numbers when you're inputting them to the EC, that they are the most accurate for your boat at its current time. So, because it's usually to your benefit that we get the most or that ORA gets the most accurate information, because you usually will see a better reflection of your actual boat performance when you do that. So thank you, Gigi, for bringing that up.
Yeah, sure. So I did have my rating updated recently because I installed a feathering prop, 3-blade versus 2-blade. And I noticed still says 2-blade. And so I'm kind of wondering what else might not be correct. I have the certificate with the correct information and a new rating, but it's just not reflected in the database.
This
And
is
yes,
for
GG is
PHRF or
correct.
for ORR-Ez?
Yeah, no, PHRF. I haven't been able to find
it
that's why I
depends.
said, is it important or?
As long as you have the correct rating in hand when you're being asked for it, that's not super important. I don't know.
Okay.
One of the real advantages to kind of these modern rating systems is that all these databases are online. So like my software, NextSailor, I download that rating file twice a day into NextSailor, once in the morning, actually maybe 3 times a day. But basically, it's getting updated almost in real time. So the problem with the old PHRF systems and Tom's PHRS system is that basically, unfortunately, that software is so old, there was no such thing as internet connectivity when that software was originally written. So it requires Tom, every time that there's any change, he has to export it and then push it over to the GYA members to update. There's a process. And so it's just not as real time. So that's one of the advantages of moving to one of these new systems, is that basically everything is online from the start. Like, I think even all the rating and everything is done through a web interface. So those details get updated in real time. So you don't have to worry about that moving forward. And if there is any, I know we have one certificate that's in kind of a weird place right now because of them doing a head sail change with the one design thing, and Ket knows what I'm talking about there. But those, when we have those weird little issues where like some piece of information isn't getting updated correctly, Ket is definitely our go-to guy to make sure that the details are correct. I've got, as the handicap chairman, I have administrative access to the ORR-Ez data, but I don't get all the back room, behind the curtain details that Ket does, because he's the man when it comes to the technical stuff. So he gets all the cool details. So
Yeah, if you have any issues with your data on your EZ certificate, don't hesitate to email me and we'll figure it out.
And I'm sorry, how did y'all get to the easy in regatta management? How did you get to that?
oh, you just go to regattaman.com.
Yeah,
Put that back up and show them the.
Yeah,
you go to certificates.
yeah, so you go to regattaman.com, and then there's
I gotcha.
certificates at the top, and then you can get to the valid list and also the application and things like that.
Okay, great. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, and then I don't know your first name, Jay, so I'll just say Mr. McGee. I'm assuming you're a Mr. What does a change in head sail affect the spinnaker downwind rating? And my first question is, are you looking at the non-spinnaker or spinnaker ratings? But beyond that, Ket, would you have any idea why a head sail change? I know that in certain reaching conditions, the model assumes that you're reaching with the head sail and not reaching with the spinnaker. So therefore, some of the courses like random leg and some of the mostly reaching courses will actually be changed, even though the spinnaker is not changing. But on a pure downwind, would that be affected by a head sail change?
Maybe.
Yeah.
It definitely might be in the heavier air, but yeah, the VPP calculates the crossovers. When you change from a head sail to a spinnaker and so forth, which is going to be different for different boats. Yes, I have seen the downwind spinnaker be affected by the size of that head sail. And I actually asked that question and I don't remember what the answer was yet, but I will get back to everyone on that.
Okay. And just as an aside, and just so everybody knows, we're going to be doing more of these. There's again, I'm assuming everybody got the email since you're here. In another 2 weeks, we're going to talk a little bit more. We're going to go a little bit more detail on racing under easy and how to kind of compare yourself to other boats. We'll talk a little bit more about some more specifics, kind of like what we're talking about here, where how the sails change and kind of like how we can help kind of interpret like where the best possible like boat speed calculations are kind of coming into play and things like that. And then I'm also kind of out of band of this series of webinars. I'm going to be I'm going to try to do a video interview with Jim Teeters, and he's the actual developer of the VPP. I forget at what point is the VPP, like 30 plus years old at this point, I think, or at least the original version was probably that old, I think, if I don't remember.
Yes, that's right.
Jim Teeters is, I forget his exact title, but he is one of the offshore personnel for US Sailing, and he wrote the VPP that's used for ORR and ORR-Ez, and he also consults with ORC as well, which is the kind of the European counterpart to ORR. And so he's got a lot of good information, and he's looked at a lot of these things over the years. So we have another question about this. And how does the code 0 affect rating? And I know that's a question I posed to you recently, Ket. So if you'd like to answer that.
Currently, the code 0 does not affect the rating at all. We tried, was it last year or the year before, to declare a code 0. And what a code 0 is it's a small flat spinnaker. So it's a spinnaker is defined as any sail with a mid-girth to foot ratio of 75% or greater. And a code 0 is, in this context, defined as a spinnaker with a mid-girth to foot ratio of between 75 and 85%. So this is going to be a smaller, flatter, typically, well, flatter, yes, it would be flatter, spinnaker. And so we tried to have a declaration of who has a code 0 spinnaker. And we had an unintended consequence that the VPP likes to use a code 0 downwind in light air when you're sailing hot BMG angles. And that's not, while that kind of sail might measure as a code 0, that's not typically what people have. People have heavy, often panel sails that are designed for reaching, often offshore reaching as a code 0, and not for light air VMG running. And so we created a unexpected problem, and so that was removed. And now currently code 0s are not rated at all, but that may change for next year. I don't know that, but it's on the list.
Yeah. And that's one more thing that I forgot to point out in my notes from the start of the presentation is this rating system and these boats, this is not a static thing that stays the same year after year. Ket and the rest of the technical committee, they maintain and review a lot of this information and make changes based either on the certificate or on how the model works and things like that to more accurately reflect the conditions in the boats and kind of the changes in technologies and things like that over the years. So every year the ORR is getting, of course, we always want to make sure it's getting improved, but the models and everything are always getting improved every single year, which does get into, Scott, to the question you have in there. Yeah, we're just like before with any perf rating, like it's best to renew your EZ certificate year after year. You get the benefits of the changes. For instance, one of the more recent changes that has made, I think, a large difference just in our racing here at Fort Walton Yacht Club is the switch between the 4 wind band to the 5 wind band. And I think that was introduced for this year, right, Kat, if I'm correct? Yeah.
Right.
And I think having that light medium wind band is great. And if you don't keep up with your EZ certificate, you're not going to get the benefits of that. And it becomes harder for race committees and things. So yeah, every year we want to make sure everybody's maintaining those EZ certificates. The renewal process, especially if you're making no changes, is really simple. So just keep it up every year. So Gigi asked,
hey, Kevin, how does, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ramsey.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering, how does your program work? How does your program deal with that? So Next Sailor, we started using that for everything. If you have somebody that has a certificate with 4 wins and now they're entered with 5 wins and they haven't replaced they haven't gotten a new certificate, does that screw everything up? Does it compute at all? Does it interpolate?
No, it doesn't compute on if they are running an old certificate without the wind band that's specified for the 5 wind ratings, they'll get their rating will show as 0.
Great. Okay.
On
Got
the thing.
it.
So
we do have to update our certificates pretty much every year.
Like I said, it's really best. The changes happen a little more frequent. I'm not going to say they happen more frequently, but the changes are. Some years there's not a lot of change, but some years there are changes, fairly significant changes as Jim Teeters and everybody are constantly improving the product. And it becomes, especially if you let these certificates get even just 2 years out of date, it becomes very, very hard, if not impossible. And I'm sure, Ket, back me up. It becomes it's impossible to compare certificates even from a couple of years ago for boat performance. So you really want to make sure these things stay up to date, and the renewal price is lower than the initial purchase in the first place. So Gigi asks, if I have a PHRF certificate, do I need to apply for the EZ? Yes, you do. The EZ system still, it's a question of making sure that it gives a chance of everybody to review their details for 2025, but also there wasn't really like an import process, and EZ didn't want to assume that we were just going to move everybody's certificate over. So we want everybody to go through that process and become comfortable with it. I will say, if your boat has a current PHRF certificate and your boat does require offset file work, we talked about it a little bit. If the boat is not part of the database and they cannot get one of the offset files to match up to your boat, there is an extra fee, and Ket works with you directly on that. That extra fee is $50, and that will be offset by the GYA Handicap Committee. We want everybody, regardless of their boat, if they have a current certificate, to pay the same price, which is $100, to get the EZ certificate for 2025. If you already have an EZ certificate, I think the renewal is what, $80, I believe, for the renewal, if I'm not mistaken. But if you're applying new and your boat does require an offset file, the normal price would be $150. If you let us know, and actually Ket will let us know on the committee, we will be issuing a $50 basically subsidy or a check back to you, so that you're not having to, so that we're absorbing that $50 offset for those people. So.
Okay. What is the difference between all ORR-EZ certificates, and then you can click on apply/renew, or buying the EZ performance package? It looks like the same thing, so I'm not sure what the
I
distinction
have my
is
own
between
thoughts
the
on the
two.
performance package, and I don't want to throw them out there. I would say that you don't need to worry about the performance package. All the good details that you really need to race your boat are under a standard certificate. So you want to apply renew for the certificate, go through that process. The valid list is basically, that's the rating list. That's where you go to look up the database and look at anybody's rating and things like that.
So there's no difference? Is that what you're telling me? Or
Between what? The performance package and a regular certificate?
well, it doesn't say regular certificate. It just says all ORR-EZ certificates. Then you can click on apply/renew.
Right.
Okay, so if I don't have one, that's where I go.
Yeah, that's
Because
everybody
the
clicks
screen looks
on
the
that button
same.
So regardless of whether you have a one design boat, a standard handicap boat, or one of these boats that requires an offset file, it's the same process for everybody. So everybody clicks on the apply renew button.
Okay, because the other choice, the performance package, it looks like the data you want is exactly the same.
Right. The performance package is basically
It's a separate add-on.
Yeah.
It's not part of the certificate application process. It's a separate add-on.
Okay, well, as being new to this,
Yeah.
I didn't understand the distinction, so that's why I was asking.
Oh, no. Perfect. Great. No, that's great. And yeah, you don't need to worry about the performance package. Just everybody needs to click the apply renew, and that's how they get started on it.
All right, thanks.
So,
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're a hair over the time, so I want to make sure I be respectful for everybody's time. Like I said, this recording will be available on gya.org/handicap for anybody's reference later. If you do have any questions, more specific questions about anything, please don't hesitate to ask. The best email for the handicap committee is handicap@gya.org. That'll get to everybody and or everybody on the committee. And if it's a question I can't answer or a question, whatever, we'll pass it around to the right person, make sure you get answered. And please be on the lookout in 2 weeks. 2 weeks from now, on Monday at 7 o'clock, will be the next EZ webinar. We'll be talking more about specifically what it looks like to race with these ratings, and how to think about time on distance and time on time numbers, and how to look at your fleets, and how fleets might be different now with these numbers, or slightly different. And then 2 weeks after that, we'll be having a specific race management meeting where we talk more about, how the documents need to be updated to reflect the new rating system, how to actually observe the correct details for scoring later on, and then what software to use and how to actually do the scoring when you're finished. So I hope everybody can join us for the second and third webinars. And like I said, thank you for your time, and I will wish everybody a good night.
All right. Thank you, Kevin.
All right.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, everybody. Great presentation. Appreciate it.